Welcome, welcome, one and all. I had a few things in mind in relation to this upcoming movie that I wanted to share with you all. And the idea mainly came to me while I was doing my stream earlier today, around 8. I was talking about Franklin Richards and how in the comics, he had difficulty controlling his powers and understanding how they worked, as well as restraining himself, because he's a child, and a child with seemingly limitless power would not know how to keep their emotions in check, and not cause harm or something to happen by accident through their thoughts. Going along with that, I brought up how at one point he mistakenly sent himself to Mephisto's realm. I'm saying realm because I don't want to risk what the name of the place actually is, just in case it would get me flagged for using certain language. Franklin also brings Ben Grimm back to life. I don't remember what happened to Ben, but I believe he was taken out in a fight, or it happened as a result of him performing his duties as a member of the Fantastic Four. And that's when I had this idea where Franklin Richards could have brought Tony Stark back to life. And the scene I would have in mind is an older Franklin Richards is with his father, Reed Richards, and he is talking with him about some of the greatest scientific minds. And he mentions how much Tony Stark has done. What he's built, how he learned from his mistakes, how he became a hero, and made a sacrifice that saved everyone. Now, at the time, I was thinking that maybe Franklin feels a little saddened by this and decides to bring Tony Stark back because he believes, based on what his father has just told him, that the world still needs Tony Stark to continue to help it grow and advance. But now I'm thinking it could work just as well if Franklin simply thought about him being alive and he came back. Because once again, Franklin, when I was reading up on him years ago, didn't seem to have much in the way of self-control when it comes to his powers. Hello there, Abdullah. It is very good to see you again. And thank you, Abdullah, who I'm sure gave me a like just now, and to whoever else had just given a like. Now, obviously, that wouldn't answer the question as to how Doctor Doom would come about. Just some ideas I had regarding the new Avengers movie coming out next year. Wait, is it next year? Is it 2027 or is it 2026? I honestly can't remember. I know it comes out in December. It might be next year. But regardless, I've been puzzled about how Doom is going to work in this movie because I truly believe that they didn't cast Robert Downey Jr. in that role just because he's a big name and it'll get people's butts in seats. I feel like they chose him for a reason that's integral to the story of that film. And I don't see any way for them to do that without basically making this a fake Doctor Doom, although not necessarily in a literal sense. Just like how Ultron is so much different from how he is in the comics, and Tony Stark, of course, wasn't the one that built Ultron in the comics. It was Hank Pym. Just like how Thanos is completely different in the MCU than he's ever been in the comics and cartoons and any other mediums that have featured him. There is no reason to believe that Doctor Doom in the MCU is going to resemble his comic book self much if at all. He'll have the iconic look, I'm sure. But he won't be the Doom that we think of. Just like the Mandarin, he's completely different from how he is in the comics. Now, I have no reason to believe that I have no evidence to prove any of this. It's just a hunch. And I could be completely wrong. All right. Well, thank you for stopping by. And I'll see you in another one. I have a hunch that there is a good reason why they chose Robert Downey Jr. Yes, he's a great actor. Yes, he's one of the best. But that alone does not make up a reason for why somebody is hired for a particular role. In some cases, I'm sure it is, but not always. They said, the Russos, that no one else could play this character. Which, at first, sounds completely bonkers. Because how can you say that Robert Downey Jr., an American actor, is the only one who can play a character who has roots in Europe and is not actually from the United States? He is from a fictional country called Latveria, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, he's at the very least born in a country which is a part of Europe, meaning that he would have some kind of an accent, most likely. Due to how his name is pronounced, I've always believed that Doom should have a Germanic accent. Victor Von Doom. Just like Von Strucker. It is a popular name, popular enough name in Germany, or at least it has been. If I'm not mistaken, Beethoven's name was Ludwig von Beethoven. I would have to look it up again, but I'm fairly certain that is the case. So if the quote-unquote best actor to play a European-based character is an American actor, there has to be a reason for it beyond people like him, and he makes us a lot of money. Dr. Doom has always had facial scarring. And when we saw Tony's body at the end of Endgame, obviously his face was more than just a little bit bruised up. It's nowhere near as damaged as Doom's is in the comics, but it is still wounded enough to where scars would probably have formed had he lived. And we're also dealing with a lot of storylines that relate to the multiverse. There being different versions of every character and them exploring that, like they did in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Now, those variants don't go by different names, right? So, a variant of Tony Stark that somehow did survive the events of Endgame, calling himself Victor Von Doom, is a bit much. Unless he chose a new name so as not to be found and to remove all traces of his existence. Not existence. I meant to say remove all traces of his being alive. I don't know how that could work. Perhaps it could be as simple as somehow, some way, using the Infinity Stones did not take his life. It just seriously messed him up, and he went unconscious. The problem with that, of course, would be, well, he was buried. So, what, he's going to wake up and bust out of the coffin and grave? Probably not, but there's a way you could make that work. Oversave official, how is it going? How are you? Now, I'm going to be honest. I'll be very angry if none of this is true. If Victor Von Doom in the MCU is not related in any way to Tony Stark, despite their claims that Robert Downey Jr. is the only one that could play this role, or the only one right for it. If he was born and raised and lived in Europe and just had a very authentic American accent, like what Hugh Laurie can produce, then I could see their point. But Robert Downey Jr. was born and raised here and has lived here all his life. So it literally makes no sense. I'm sure someone would try to argue, well, what about Sherlock Holmes? And that's a fair point. But here's the thing. That wasn't a franchise of movies in which he already played a character. He played that role. He played only one role in those movies, and that was the main one. And in my opinion, he did do a fairly convincing English accent. But I am an American, and thus not that good at picking up on differences between a faked accent and a authentic one. So take what I said with a grain of salt. But that's a British slash English detective, not a fictional German based supervillain who rules over an entire country and is appearing in the same universe, same film universe in which that actor already played a major role. This isn't like Benedict Cumberbatch playing both Doctor Strange and Dormammu, because Dormammu is not only not human, but was created using CGI, I would imagine. I mean, obviously he was. And his voice was different enough. If those two things were true for Doom, which wouldn't make sense because he's a human, I would have no problem with it. If we were talking about Ultron coming back and Robert Downey Jr. voicing him, I might question why they didn't bring James Spader back for the role. But besides that, I would see no problem with it. If Robert Downey Jr. was being hired to play a mutant that barely looks human, or some kind of creature or supervillain that's not a human, that's an alien, that's a demon, and he was recognizable but different enough to where you didn't just say, "Oh, that's basically looks like Tony Stark wearing makeup," then I would have no problem with it. But here's the thing. You not only have brought him back to play a major villain in the Marvel in Marvel history, one of the greatest villains in Marvel history in terms of popularity and other things. But you've also cast him as a villain that's a genius scientist, inventor, who some have said is kind of like an evil Iron Man. And yes, there is the fact that he's also a master of the mystic arts on top of that. But he's first and foremost a scientist. His magic has been on par with that of Doctor Strange, if not greater than. But I think people would mainly see him as a man with great intelligence. And you have brought the actor that played Tony Stark back to play that role. If it's not because this version of Doom is tied in with Iron Man, then it reeks of laziness and the lack of a desire to take risks by casting an actor for a role that maybe hasn't had much in the way of experience. There's another reason why I believe that this version of Doom will have to be either a resurrected Tony Stark or a variant that was Tony Stark and became Victor Von Doom. And that is the trailers for Thor and Captain America. The original Captain America. I realize he's just being called Steve Rogers, but he'll always be Captain America. There's something somber about those trailers. Now, I do believe that was the case with Infinity War, and it might have been the case with Endgame as well, but something about these trailers makes it seem like this is personal. Now, yes, it was personal for them to go up against Thanos, but here's the rub. In the MCU, they have not met Doctor Doom. He hasn't appeared in any movies outside of one end credit scene, and that was in the recently released Fantastic Four movie. So, what's the reason for Steve Rogers coming back? Is it just for ratings? Or does it have to do with the story? Same thing with Thor. Is it just for ratings because of Chris Hemsworth's popularity? Or is it because he now has to fight a former ally who is nothing like the man he once knew? It is true that Loki will have a role to play in this movie. And I would assume the following Avengers film after this one. And that does need to be considered. But in that trailer, he behaves as somebody who is about to fight against someone or something, and he seems either fearful, saddened, possibly both, maybe even reluctant. He literally prays to have the strength to fight one final battle. Given what we've seen of Thor so far in the MCU, why would he feel the need to do that? Just doesn't make any sense. Yes, he has a child now to protect, but Thor should not feel threatened. I feel like even having an adopted child would not make Thor so concerned or have any worry. Because if something did happen to him, that child could be raised by the Asgardians, by Valkyrie. And I just don't believe they would show something like that in a trailer unless it was relevant to this film specifically. And that child is probably not going to play a major role in the film's story. I could see this being a variant of Tony Stark that never was Tony Stark. A universe in which he was perhaps adopted by a family in Europe with the last name Doom, and they named him Victor. That honestly sounds like the most realistic approach they'll take. They could take. They could also write it to where Tony Stark's body is just being used as a vessel for Doom to use, either through a spell that he's using to control the body and bring it back to life remotely, or to house his soul in. There's a bunch of reasons as to why Doom could potentially do something like this. Wanting to expand on his knowledge of science and advance his technology. Maybe advance his suit. I mean, if he already has magic under his belt, imagine what he could do if he was to build a suit that's even remotely close to the Mark 85 or 50 in the last two Avengers films that were released. And then combine that with his magical prowess. That would be an individual most likely strong enough to fight any one of the Avengers himself. Possibly all at once. With difficulty, but I'm sure he could give them more than just a little bit of trouble. So we'll see what happens. Something I forgot to mention in regards to the Franklin Richards idea, where I suggested that he brought Tony Stark back to life. Two things, actually. I'm not suggesting that the Franklin Richards we saw in that Fantastic Four movie did this. He's a baby. No, I'm referring to, and I know I already said this, but just in case people were perhaps confused, I'm referring to Franklin Richards in the future. And that could work because in the comics, there had been a story line where an adult Franklin Richards met his younger self and trained him in how to use his powers. So it's not inconceivable for them to show an older Franklin Richards from the future, of course, who did this, and then that version of Tony Stark went into a different timeline, traveled to the past, and he could have gotten that ability through taking out Kang. Or if it was in a different universe, timeline, what have you, he could have used the Infinity Stones for that purpose. And that could explain the scars on his face that are a major part of Doom's character. That's why he wears that mask. It's the main reason. And so I was thinking, if Franklin brought him back, Tony Stark, now renamed as Doom for some reason, seeks out the force by which he was resurrected. Finds out about Franklin. And along with this desire for power, because he did wield the Infinity Stones together, at least at one point, decides that he needs a power either similar to that or greater than that to either fix the world or learn from his perceived mistakes. That was always a part of his character, right? He learns from his mistakes in the first movie and stops building weapons for the military. He builds the Iron Man suit, which of course is a weapon, but it's used for defensive purposes to protect himself and people in general. As well as to, though it's not touched upon as much in the movies, build better sources of energy. In the comics, he uses the arc reactor technology to build, I hesitate to say cleaner, superior forms of energy, but that's basically what he does. And we, of course, see how in every subsequent film he has a challenge. Something goes awry. He basically says to himself, I'm not going to let that happen again. This is how I'll solve that problem. I think the mistake he could potentially see himself having made, would be that he sacrificed himself and left his family alone. His daughter without a father to help raise her. So perhaps now he wants that great power so as to prevent alternate versions of himself from needing to lose their lives to get rid of Thanos and his army. Because with the power of Franklin Richards, or honestly any reality warper, even Scarlet Witch, he could travel to different timelines. Which would explain why Loki is involved, because if I'm not mistaken, through the Loki series, he becomes a sort of watcher of the multiverse. I feel like his position is kind of similar to Doctor Strange's, where he is tasked with protecting threats to the multiverse and things that could, shall we say, mess with it. Just like how Doctor Strange's job is to protect the world from all magical threats. There's another thing that comes to mind. There are two lines of dialogue that I remember, which, looking back, could, depending on how this how this story is written, have been foreshadowing that we wouldn't have known was that at the time, but looking back, might be so. Thanos, in towards the end of Infinity War, tells Tony Stark, "We're both cursed with knowledge." I might have gotten that quote wrong somewhat, but that's the gist of it. And in at the towards the end of Endgame, apologies if I said this what I'm about to say in this stream already. He tells Banner, only bring back everyone that was lost. Don't do anything else. It would be ironic if Tony didn't take his own advice when he used the stones. And I don't know, maybe desired to bring himself back to life after using them, considering the possibility that the overwhelming power of the stones would be way too much for his body to handle. I don't think it's inconceivable for that to be a possibility. And perhaps he did do that and he somehow messed it up. He brought himself back, but either in a different in an alternate timeline or something, maybe brought himself back, um but like as a reincarnation of himself, under a different name and from a different part of the world. And well, I guess reincarnation wouldn't work, but there's pretty much limitless there are pretty much limitless possibilities as to how something like that could have gone, if that's the route they take with this film story. There's a good chance that I'm completely wrong about all of this, which will disappoint me. Not because I want to be right, not because I'm biased about my own opinions and my own ideas and possible theories, but because I truly do believe that just bringing Robert Downey Jr. back to play a character without there being any in-canon reasons for it is, forgive me for saying, incredibly stupid and lazy, and doesn't have a shred of creative thinking behind it. I hope I'm wrong. That it's something akin to the ideas I've presented to you all. But time will tell. There was a trailer put out, I think, 2 days ago, that's claiming to be the official trailer. It is not. So if you stumble across that and don't watch it because you're worried that it's going to spoil things, don't worry. Someone made an AI trailer, and presented it as an official teaser. If you did see it and are somehow angry about the fact that you watched it because you didn't expect it to spoil things that you consider to be information that you would have rather seen for the first time in the film, don't worry. It's fake. It doesn't, of course, mean that there couldn't be similarities between this trailer and the official one when they do release it. But I have reason to believe that that's probably not going to be the case. There are some things that just don't make sense in that trailer. For example, Doctor Doom fighting with a sword and shield. I'm not going to suggest that he couldn't fight with a sword and shield, but his main way of doing things is mainly through magic and other forms of projectile attacks, as well as energy shields. That's, of course, before he gains access to, some kind of insane power boost, either through the draining of another character's powers or the acquisition of an all powerful force. I'm sure when that happens, he just has a thought and it becomes real. But then again, it's also true that villains in the MCU, at least in more recent times, have not been much have not really been similar to their comic book counterparts. It's a neat scene to watch. Um, but again, it really doesn't make sense for Doom. Fake or otherwise. Now, there is something else that I might have said in a stream before, but I cannot remember. And that's this thought I had. Probably not going to happen, but I think it would be genius and honestly great if they did this. And what that is have a version of Tony Stark fight Doom. A version of Tony Stark obviously being played by Robert Downey Jr. You could easily do that because Doom, I would assume, will have a mask on a majority of the time. And there have been movies where one actor played two characters at once while being in the same room or place. I don't think there's a chance in heck that this will happen, but it would be a very pleasant surprise. And then you could kind of give characters closure that they might not have had. Maybe he comes back and it's just temporary, whatever brought him back, you know, kind of gave him like a not one-way ticket, but one-day ticket or something, just so that he could help defeat Doom. And then he passes on, sort of like how Odin did, and goes to the afterlife. Or he could fight Doom, play a major role in defeating him, and then turn in his arc reactor and be done. Because Endgame was leading to Tony Stark calling it quits and only reserving the Iron Man technology to protect himself and his family. Possibly get involved if things got really hairy, but he makes it clear himself that he wants to bring back what they've lost, but he doesn't want to lose what he has now. And by passing away, he lost that. I think this would tie it all up together rather nicely. Now, yes, you'll always have people who say, "Oh, well, he's alive again, so why can't we just have Tony Stark back again and again and again?" Well, did people say that about Steve Rogers? Did they expect to see more films with Chris Evans as Steve Rogers in the past, exploring showing his relationship with uh, with it's Peggy Carter, right? Um, did they expect to see that in a movie? Um, we got a Black Widow movie after she was no longer alive, sure, but she had never had a movie before, and she's also much younger than Robert Downey Jr. And that's not to say anything about age being a factor in playing Iron Man, since when he has a fight, he's wearing the suit, and the suit pretty much does all the fighting for him. Yes, he does pilot it, but it's not like it isn't doing the majority of the work under his operation. I'm mainly speaking for myself when I say this, because the passing of Tony Stark was one of the main reasons why I stopped following the MCU. You can call me nuts for making this decision based on that, but I truly believed he deserved better. He'd been through enough bad times, enough trauma, and he deserved a happy ending. Yes, again, I'm biased because he is my favorite. But it also impacted me personally because not long before that movie came out. No, wait, I'm sorry. Scratch that. Because the scene in which he loses his life, I was reminded of my stepfather. I don't know why. Sometimes these things just happen. It kind of messed me up. There was just something so depressing about that. There are character sacrifices that aren't super depressing. That one was, for me. It felt, and I'm not trying to make a pun when I say this, lifeless. This wasn't Tony flying off and, you know, losing his life in a battle. It was I mean, I guess it would have been sad regardless, but you had this character sacrifice his life in every single film. I would argue more so than other characters, at, at least as far as the original Avengers go. Because he was always very close to not making it out of the events of those films. I can't make that argument for Thor, with the exception of maybe Ragnarok and possibly Love and Thunder, which I unfortunately don't really remember much of. Um, and um, of course, Steve Rogers, but the only time I remember that really happening to him was in his fight with Bucky during Winter Soldier at the end of it. But Tony flew a nuclear missile into space. And his suit was pretty much out of power at that point. And they were about to seal the gateway by which he brought that missile through. In Age of Ultron, he tries to stop whatever Ultron is doing, and you know, um, if I'm not mistaken, he either gets close to, you know, pretty darn close to getting crushed, or there might have been like an explosion or something. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, he was definitely putting himself in serious risk. In Iron Man 1, when he tells Pepper to destroy the giant arc reactor to take care of Stain, he's at a point where his arc reactor, the one that he needs to stay alive because it keeps the shrapnel from his heart, is out of juice, and the armor is completely destroyed. And that explosion sends out a giant beam of energy towards the sky. I to this day I don't remember. I don't know how he survived that. Maybe there's something I'm forgetting. Um, Not only did he survive that, but he made a full recovery. Um, to put him through so many of those moments, only to give him a child and a wife, and then take that from him in his final film appearance, to me is kind of doing his character dirty. People like to bring up the fact that Captain America more or less told him he's not the one to make the sacrificial play in Avengers 1. But they seem to forget that he already did that in that same movie towards the end by taking that missile into space. What does he need to do? Make that play in multiple movies for that to prove Captain Rogers wrong? Tony Stark is the most vulnerable of the Avengers. because the suit is literally what allows him to fight. Yes, there's his will, but the only weapon he has is the suit. Sure, he can fight to some extent, but he's not trained like Steve is. He's not trained like Thor is. He's not trained like Black Widow or Hawkeye are. He's still just an inventor who is really good at piloting the Iron Man suits that he himself created. And in every single movie, they get destroyed. When Steve loses his shield, he can still fight very well. That shield is not what makes him Captain America. That shield is not what gives him the strength he possesses. Just like Thor's hammer is not what gives him the strength. As we are aware of from having seen Ragnarok. Tony is a man who wields a technological creation to fight the bad guys, more or less. And you put him in the most dangerous situations to where he's always close to losing his life. Again, more so than almost any other main Avenger. I'm probably wrong, but it just seems that it appears that way to me. Maybe it was the best ending for that movie. But you know, we don't just watch movies, play games, listen to music because it's potentially objectively good or great. We consume them because we like them. They entertain us. And if something stops being entertaining, we stop consuming it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a person deciding, I'm done with these movies because of how my favorite character's journey ended. There's other reasons too, but that's one of the main ones. And I know I'm not alone in thinking this. But with all that being said, thank you once again for joining me for another stream. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything I have said regarding the Doomsday movie. I'm sure I'll be doing more streams as new information comes out about this film, and or I have other ideas for topics related to it. So please share your thoughts with me in the comments section. Consider leaving a like and subscribe if you have enjoyed the content that you've seen so far. Let's make it to 400 subs. And as always, to end it, I bring you the quote of a famous fictional character. The truth is, I am Iron Man.